He went out again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as he reclined at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when Jesus heard it, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick I came not to call the righteous, but sinners."
Good morning. You guys doing okay today? Yes? You alive? You awake? Enthusiastic? I always hated it when my dad would say that to me in the morning. Alive, awake, enthusiastic, whatever. I am glad that you guys are here. If you have a Bible, you can open it up to Mark chapter 2, where Kaylee was reading from. And I got a quick question to start us off. Anybody enjoy taking out the trash? You enjoy? Okay, we got two people that enjoy taking out the trash. Well, I live in the city. I live in Oak Park, live in Des Moines, and I have already had two extremely close encounters with raccoons. And I'm not kidding. Twice I have opened up the lid, and we've named him. His name is Chuck. It's Chuck. We actually found out that Chuck is a girl because Chuck had babies. But old Chuck and the gang, she has been right there staring me face in the face. Chuck loves trash. But I came across another couple, not raccoons, but humans, who also love trash. And so that's how I'm going to start off this morning. I'm going to show you a picture of trash. And just check out these two artists and what they do. They take trash, they take these ordinary, useless, dirty objects, and they craft them into a masterpiece. There's not people behind this pile. That's just the shadow. It's called shadow art. I was sitting on the computer looking at these pictures because they've got a lot of them for an hour. Giant waste of time, but it was amazing. It wasn't a waste of time. It was so much fun. It was beautiful. And some of their artifacts like that, I don't know how much that one went for. I think the most one of them sold was for $700,000. $700,000. A lump of trash turned into a masterpiece. We're broken people, right? We like to say that a lot. We are not a finished product here, even if you're a Christian. And so here's another question. How many of you struggle with self-doubt? Yeah, me too. If you're not thinking that you do, then you're probably lying to yourself. We all struggle with self-doubt, with these thoughts of being useless, of being dirty, of being sinful, of being ordinary, untalented, not good enough. I mean, those thoughts go through my mind on a very regular basis. And so today, what I want to do is I want us to marvel. I want us to look at Jesus and look at the story of Jesus and just marvel that when you find and you follow Jesus, that's our term around here, to find and follow your Creator. And when you find and you start following Jesus, He really does take ordinary, broken, dirty people and He transforms them, completely transforms them into what Ephesians 2 would say, God's masterpiece. He transforms you into a masterpiece. And so let's look at this story, and that's my goal. I just want you to look at Jesus, and I want you to be blown away by Him, because He is amazing. And so we've been walking through this Gospel of Mark, and we've been looking at all of these stories about Jesus because Mark is a biography. It's a biography about who this Jesus is. And each of these stories, again, remember, they're like all compact and like not a ton of teaching in them, but a ton of visual things going on here. And they all work as like a puzzle, a piece of the puzzle that's being put together. Each one of these stories, they're all a piece of the puzzle that's painting or it's creating a bigger picture. And the big picture is we talked about this the very first message in Mark, that Jesus is this king, and he's a king that's setting up his kingdom. That's the big picture. And so all of these little stories, they're all just little pieces of the puzzle being put together to make and create that bigger picture for you to see. And so let's look at it. Mark 2, I like to just, especially with narratives, I like to just walk through it again. Because you heard it, you got your eyes on it, it's just better to read it again. Because that's how the Bible works. It just works on you and works on you. So get your eyes on the text and just be amazed at who this Jesus is. Verse 13, Mark 2. It says that he, Jesus, went out again besides the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. So if you were here last week, if you weren't, not a big deal, but if you were here last week, the last scene, if you will, if this is a whole movie playing out, then last scene was Jesus in a house, crowd surrounding him, and he was teaching, and they broke open the roof. Paralyzed man comes down, and Jesus heals him. The next scene, right after this, Jesus leaves the house, and he goes to the seashore to begin teaching again. And I want you to notice something here at the beginning. Notice the crowd again. The crowd, what do? They come out to meet him. They come out to meet him. Here's what I want to point out. They simply come out. That's all they do. The crowd comes out. They're fascinated by Jesus, but they don't follow him. I talked about that a little last week, and I just want to mention it again. This crowd, they're fascinated by Jesus, but they don't actually follow him. There's a major lesson to be learned from this crowd, and it is that just because you're fascinated with Jesus does not make you a follower of Jesus. Just because he's interesting, and you may be in church. You may go to church every week. You may have been coming here every week. Just because you come to church does not make you a Christian. Just because you're fascinated does not make you a follower. And that's the lesson from the crowd here. So the crowd, the scene is set. Jesus is walking. The crowd flocks to him. And they're listening to him again. Verse 14. And he passed by, and he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and he followed him. So again, I think we have to do, especially living in 2024, we have to do the hard work of trying to get into the minds of the original reader. Because we read this and you're going, okay, Jesus is walking and he says to this guy, a tax collector, whatever that means, and he tells them to follow him. What's the big deal? If you were the original reader of this, you would have picked up on a lot of things. Because look, today, none of us like taxes. Can I get an amen? Nobody likes taxes. But to the Jews, back then, something more was going on. A lot more was going on. These tax collectors, this is really fascinating when I was thinking about it. The tax collectors were honestly the ancient mafia. They worked for the Romans, and the Romans would put these tax collectors in charge. They were Jewish people, and they would put them in charge of getting taxes from the other Jews. And the Romans said, you know what, and actually you can take off as much off the top as you want. So taxes $10, you can charge them $30. And that's what they would do. My caricature of tax collectors as a kid kind of growing up was just like, yeah, I mean, people would just give them their money and they weren't really good people. But study actually shows that the tax collectors were literally they were like thugs. They would go shake people down for money. and they would force them to give them more money. And as a result, the tax collectors would have a lot of money. They'd be very, very wealthy people. But the difference was no one looked at them as like this cool, Al Capone with a Tommy gun type of, guy. Rather, they would look at them as like these like Nazi sympathizers. That's how the Jewish people viewed the tax collectors, because they were traitors to their country. They not only were robbing their own people, they were traitors. They had jumped ship. They had joined the other team. They were working for the Romans. In the eyes of the Jews, the tax collectors were the scum of the earth. Some of them would view them in the same category as murderers and thieves. They could not actually go to court and bear witness in court. They weren't actually allowed to do that. And a lot of the Pharisees, a lot of the religious leaders would actually tell you it's okay to lie to them. Think about that. Living in your culture, in your community, that the people that are talking to you face to face are probably not even telling you the truth, because everyone's telling them it's okay to lie to them. That's who these tax collectors were. And here's something really fascinating about Levi specifically. Levi, the name Levi, probably meant that he came from the tribe of the Levites, because that's how they named their kids. They would name your kids, and if you're from this tribe, not always, but oftentimes, that means that you would be from that tribe. And that may mean nothing to you, but just a little background, the Levites is where the priests would come from. And so we're not told, I'm reading a little bit into the story, but it's just fascinating to think about this possibility. It's very possible that Levi, the tax collector, who's also Matthew, by the way, same guy, Matthew the tax collector, very well could have had priests in his family line, which makes his betrayal against his own people and his own family all that much more horrible and wicked. And as Jesus is walking, he sees Levi, the tax collector, and he looks at Levi amongst everyone else in the crowd, and he says, I want you to follow me. Follow me. And he didn't just follow him. Verse 15 says that he went into his house. Jesus went into Levi's house. Verse 15 says this, and he reclined at the table in his house, and many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus with his disciples. Now, this word sinners is just a general sense of a wicked person or an outcast. People who didn't care about the Bible, people who didn't care about the laws and the rituals. There were criminals there. There were prostitutes there. That's the picture here. Jesus is essentially he's like in a biker bar. Like he just goes and he just starts hanging out with these people. For, the end of verse 15 says, there were many like this who followed him. There were many tax collectors and many wicked outcasts who followed this Jesus. This is the kind of group that follows Jesus. Verse 16. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw what he was eating, that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, he said to his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? Why is he doing this? Going to someone's house and eating with them means that you are a part of their community. The same is true today. You don't just go and eat with anybody, I don't think. You probably know the person that whose home you're actually entering into. But maybe a better modern day example is you gather people around, a couple of people around, and you take a picture with them, and you post it to social media. What are you saying in that picture? What you're saying in that picture is, these are my people. These are my people. That's what Jesus is saying when he entered into the home and ate with a bunch of tax collectors, a bunch of traitor thugs, and sinners, and prostitutes, and wicked people. He's saying, these are my people. This is my community. And of course, to the Pharisees, this was just absolutely shocking. Now, I'm not going to assume this is the first time in the story of Mark that we've come across these guys, Pharisees. Pharisees, they are the religious leaders. Some of you guys may know that, others may not. Their name literally means to separate, to be separatists, to separate from what is unholy. These guys were passionate about not being around sin or not being around other sinners. Their names, it was right there in their names. We separate. We don't do that. And for them, it would have been unthinkable and absolutely scandalous that a teacher of the Bible like Jesus would not only interact with sinners and talk to them, that would have been shocking enough, but he would actually make these people a part of his community? Are you kidding me? It would have been shocking to them. And so they asked the question, why? Why? Why does he eat with these tax collectors? And if you haven't picked up on it, like you're going to see almost every story for the first 8 chapters of Mark, that's the question. Why? It's the underlying question of who does this guy think he is? Who does Jesus think he is? That he could be a teacher of God's law and then go eat with a bunch of sinners? Who is Jesus? That's the theme here. And that's another question being asked. Why is Jesus doing this? And I love this. This is Jesus' response. He's God. He can respond however he wants. This is how he responds. It's amazing. Verse 17. And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but the sinners." And so what do we make of this Jesus? I mean, every time that I read him, it's like my caricatures of him just continue to get broken. He's amazing. Just stare at him. He's so interesting. He's so fascinating. And so like I said at the beginning, each of these stories, they're a piece of the puzzle, and they're putting together the bigger picture that is Jesus as king, and he's setting up his kingdom. And so this story plays into that. And so I want to ask 3 questions. I just want to ask 3 questions. As we look at this story, I want to ask who, how, and what. Who does Jesus use to build his kingdom? How does Jesus build his kingdom? And then what does it take to actually join his kingdom? Who, how, and what? Let's start with who. Who does Jesus use? Who does Jesus use to build his kingdom? Well, the story's obvious. You could probably tell me right now, but it's shocking. It's shocking, and it is honestly incredibly encouraging. Because Jesus uses guys like Levi, the tax collector. He uses outcasts. He uses outsiders. He uses the unqualified. He uses the untalented, the uneducated. He uses the poor, the sinful, the dirty, the despised. Just take a trip through the Bible with me here for a second. He uses Mary Magdalene, who had 7 demons inside of her. He uses Peter and Andrew and James and John, who were uneducated and ordinary fishermen. They were nobodies. He uses a prophet like Jeremiah, whose literal job was to speak, and he couldn't speak. He couldn't do it. He said, "I'm like a baby. I don't know how to do this." He uses Elijah, the prophet Elijah, who was suicidal. He uses David, who as a child was completely overlooked, and then when he became king, was an adulterer. He uses guys like Gideon, who are so fearful that it's like you just got to smack him upside the head over and over again. He was so fearful. He uses women like Rahab, who was a prostitute. He uses guys like Moses, and we give Moses a good rap. We think Moses is awesome. Don't forget, he started his story out with murder. He murdered somebody. All throughout the Bible, all throughout biblical history, God has used the outcast to accomplish his outcomes, the unqualified to accomplish the unthinkable, and the dirty to accomplish the divine. And I don't know about you, but when I think about that, I get so amazed that this Jesus would use me. It's so encouraging. Because if you're a Christian here today, and all of us probably fit this category in one way, shape, or form. If you're a Christian here today and you think that you are too sinful or too dumb or too weird to be used by God, then you're not reading the Bible. You're not reading the same Bible that's in front of you right now, in front of me. Because one of the qualifications, think about this, one of the qualifications of being used by God is being unqualified. That's one of the qualifications to be used by Jesus. Guys, Levi, he was a bad dude. He was a really, really bad person. We're not told, but he was grouped with murderers, and it wasn't uncommon for tax collectors to do stuff like that. Levi was a bad dude. But when he met Jesus, he got a new identity. He got a new identity. He was no longer Levi, the tax collector. He was Levi, the follower of Jesus. Christian, look at me and listen. If you have followed Jesus, then you have been given a completely new identity. Completely new. It's like a marriage. It's like a marriage. Before I got married, I was John Nemmers. After I got married, I'm no longer John Nemmers. I am John and Kaylee Nemmers. My identity was swallowed up into my wife. The two became one. The two became one. And if you have followed Jesus, and when you follow Jesus, the same thing is happening. Your identity, whoever you were before you met Jesus, is completely swallowed up in this man, this perfect man. When God sees you, he sees nothing but Jesus if you're following him. However, we know that there's an enemy out there, and his name is Satan. And his name literally means the accuser. Revelation 12:10 calls him the accuser. And one of the biggest lies that he will tell you, or honestly, one of the biggest lies that you will tell yourself at times, is that you are still that same person you were before you followed Jesus. That you are so-and-so the drug addict, so-and-so the porn addict, so-and-so the adulterer, the anxious, the angry, the uneducated. But when those lies, because they are that, they're lies if you know Jesus. When those lies come and whisper inside of your ear, you can tell them that you no longer identify with who you were, you identify with who you follow. You follow Jesus. And you are being shaped into this new human. I called it a masterpiece at the beginning of this message, and I get that from Ephesians 2, 8 through 10, which says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, this is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast, for we are his workmanship." That word means masterpiece. Christian, when God sees you, he doesn't see the sin that you used to identify with, that used to identify you, nor does he see the sin that you are currently struggling with, because we're not perfect. We all struggle. God does not see that when he sees you. He sees a son or a daughter who has had their sins completely washed and wiped away at the cross, and who are being shaped into this masterpiece as they follow Jesus. And not only that, but 1 Corinthians 12:18, one of my favorite passages in all the Bible, says that you are actually being uniquely shaped. You are uniquely shaped into God's masterpiece, into God's body, into the body of Christ. And he has actually intentionally crafted you with all of your weird wirings. Every one of us are weird, let's be honest. 1 Corinthians 12:18 says, as God has chosen, he shaped you the way that he shaped you. He purposed in it from the beginning, before the beginning of time, that he was going to shape you the way that he shaped you for a purpose. And so the question to ask is not, can I be used by God, but how am I gifted to be used by God? How has God specifically designed me? Because today, your past sins may be your gift to reaching other people. Your lack of education may actually open up the door for you to actually connect with somebody who's on the same level as you that somebody else couldn't, because they get too high of an education. No one understands what they're saying. Your weirdness, think about this. Your oddities and your idiosyncrasies that gets on maybe your spouse's nerves or somebody else's, your coworker's nerves, your weirdness may be exactly what God is looking for to create a movement of gospel. That's who Jesus uses to build his kingdom. He uses broken and sinful and redeemed and changed people to build his kingdom. What about the how? How does Jesus build his kingdom? And this is so weird. He does it this way. And it's amazing and it's crazy. He does it by befriending and eating with neglected people. At least that's the picture that we get here. I like to go on walks. I like to go on prayer walks. And so I was out on a walk one time with my buddy. And I had parked my car at a local business. And I saw somebody on the street that I knew. And I knew that this guy was a Christian. And so I went up to him and I said, "Hey, what's going on, man?" And he goes, "Yeah, where are you walking from?" And I told him the place that I was walking from. And he said, "Oh, I wouldn't step foot in there." I said, "Oh, okay, well, why?" He goes, "Well, I mean, they had a poster up, a political poster that I did not agree with. And I'll tell you what, if they want my business, they better take that stuff down." And he was an older guy, so I'm told in God's word, I don't rebuke or anything like that. I encourage. And so I just tried to encourage him by trying to share with him that when I read the Gospels, I do not see Jesus acting that way. I do not see Jesus. Here's what Jesus doesn't ask. Jesus doesn't ask, "Where's the darkness in this world so I can avoid it?" Jesus doesn't ask, "Where's the darkness in this world so I can affirm it?" He doesn't ask that question either. What Jesus asks is, "Where is the darkness in this world so I can transform it?" That's what Jesus does. He doesn't avoid it. He doesn't sit there and affirm it, but he goes there to completely and radically transform it. And we've said from the very beginning of Eden Church that we are here, we are in Des Moines for our neighbors, our neglected, and our spiritual nomads. And we get that passion from verses like verse 15. Look at the verse. many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus with his disciples in Levi's home. This is where we get that question, or get that passion. And so the question on the minds of all Christians at Eden Church should be, where is the darkness in North Des Moines so that we can bring gospel transformation light into that dark place? That's the question that should be on our hearts. Eden Church must never become a come and see church. We don't want it. We don't want the biggest and the coolest and the brightest and the whatever. We don't want that to say, you guys come in and see. We don't want to be a come and see church. We always want to be a go and tell church. A church that goes into the darkness and tells everyone about what Jesus has done for them and how they can find true transformation, completely and radically changed. Or another way to ask it is, who are you eating with? Who are you eating with? And I mean that literally, and I mean that figuratively. Who are you eating with? Literally, who are you eating with? Jesus invited so many people into his life over food. You just walk through the Gospels, read through the Gospels, and you're going to get hungry because he's always eating with people. He's always with people, and he's always inviting people he disagrees with, people he doesn't disagree with. Who are you inviting into your life over a meal to genuinely befriend and to get to know their needs and serve them? For some of you in your minds right now, you're thinking of a neighbor, of a coworker, of a neglected person in mind. And here's a challenge. Here's an encouragement. Go ask them. Go ask them to have a meal with you. Go out to eat with them. Go to a restaurant. Go take them out. Have them inside your home and just see what happens. See what happens. I think that God has designed it this way, that when you sit down and you eat with other humans, life just starts to open up. And you don't have to be the weird Christian that shoves the gospel down their throat in that moment. If they want to talk about it, that'd be awesome. But what you can do is you can just get to know them and love them and ask them who they are, get to know what they're struggling with, and then go serve them the next week once you find out that they need a fence put up. This is what we do at Eden Church. We don't have a ton of programs because we want to be a people that organically just go live like Jesus. And we're with people in their homes. We're teaching them and equipping them. This is who we want to be. Who are you eating with, literally? Figuratively, who are you eating with? Where are you setting up your table in Des Moines? This is where we're at. This is where God has called us. Where are you setting up your table in Des Moines? Maybe you've been burdened about kids. How can you set up your table, so to speak, in the schools? Maybe you've been burdened about the homeless. Well, how can you set up your table in the streets? Maybe you've been burdened about skeptics and spiritual nomads or the widows and the elderly. How can you set up your table in those environments? The question on our hearts, if you're a Christian here, the question on the hearts of everyone at Eden Church should be, where can I find the darkness on the north side of Des Moines and set up my table of light there? That's what we want to do. And this is a small picture of the kingdom. This is the picture here. A bunch of broken sinners that are following Jesus and being transformed into a beautiful masterpiece, who then go and lose their ego. They're not thinking about themselves, but rather in pursuit of befriending and eating other broken sinners, they share this gospel light that they have found hope in. That's the picture of the kingdom here, which naturally leads to the last question. If that's the kingdom, well then what? What does it take to actually join this kingdom? And listen to what Jesus says in verse 17. When Jesus heard this, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but the sinners." And Jesus is saying that only spiritually sick people call a doctor. It's a pretty simple parable, which is nice because Jesus doesn't always give us simple parables. Next week, not a simple parable. This week, pretty simple. Sick people call a doctor. I have a friend who I was just at his house a couple weeks ago, and he had a seizure, and he went to the doctor after having a seizure, and he found out that he was just riddled with cancer. Cancer, tumor in his brain, cancer on his rib, on his lung, and he was just in rough shape. He's a younger guy. He's in his lower 40s, and he's in great shape because he likes to work out. And he's talking to the doctor, who basically just gave him possibly a death sentence. They don't know yet. And he asked the doctor, he said, "Doc, what could I have done? What could I have done? Could I have come in and gotten these tests? And how could I have known that this was happening inside of me?" And the doctor said, "There's nothing you could have done. You were healthy on the outside. There's nothing you could have done." My friend needed to feel the effects of his sickness before he was able to call the doctor. He needed his sickness in his brain to be pressing up to the point where he had a seizure in order for him to realize, I need help. This is what Jesus is saying to us. Every single one of us, and we say this every single week, and sometimes you just need to keep on hearing it. Every single one of us have sin inside of us. We have a sickness growing inside of us, and it's going to kill us. It's metastasizing, and it's spreading. And only when you feel the weight and the effects of your own sin, and you realize what that sin in your heart will lead to, which is eternal death and separation from God, will you ever realize your need for the doctor. Then you will call out to the doctor. As humans, we live in a delusion. We think that we all think that we're sinners, but we think we're playing in a kiddie pool of sin. We think that sin's just kind of by my ankles, like it's fine. I'm not going to drown in it. That's a delusion. The reality is that we are all drowning in an ocean of sin. And it's only a matter of time before you stop treading water. But when you realize that you're drowning, when you realize and you felt the effects of your sin that's growing inside of you, then you do what's natural. You call for help. And that's what the gospel is. That's the gospel hope, is that you have a good doctor. You have someone who can save you and take you out of that ocean of sin. And this is really the perfect transition into communion, because we're going to take communion now. Because communion is a picture of the gospel. I brought it up here with me. The bread represents the perfect life of Jesus. The perfect life, the life that you and I could never live. We never could live this life. We needed someone perfect to live this life, and only God can do that. So God came down to earth to do just that, to live this perfect life for you. And the cup represents Jesus' blood. It represents his sacrifice. It represents what he did for you on the cross. When he died for your sins, he was absorbing your sin into himself And he was offering you in exchange this gift, his perfect life. You can't be perfect, but I can give you my perfection. That's the picture of the gospel. So as we go and do communion here, what I want you to do, I'm going to pray. Then after I pray, you can stand up and you can get your elements. They're in the back there. And when you go get them, come back to your chair. Don't take them because we're going to take them together. But I want you to take time, we're going to give you time to just pray, quiet your hearts, meditate on what the cross means. Think about this Jesus. Confess your sin. If you're a Christian, get right with God. If you're not a Christian, I want to make this clear. If you're not a Christian, no one's going to look at you sideways, but these elements are not for you. They're for those of you who have actually followed Jesus. If you haven't done that yet, do that. Do that now. As you bow your hearts, just cry out, call out for help to this Jesus, and then we'll take communion together.